back to where we left off in class on Friday, and I just wanted to continue going through our process of kind of seeing how the political spectrum started to change and kind of morph in the late 19th century. As we started off, we talked about conservatism, we've talked about economic or classical liberalism, and how now liberalism is kind of going even a little bit further left with utopian socialism. And in class we were in the midst of going over Robert Owen, Jeremy Bentham, and some of the other cats, John Stuart Mill. We started to get into Henry D. Saint-Simon, mentioned Flora Treaston, she's also in the reading. And I wanted to, I think we, some of us left off right around here. So talking about the early French socialists and Charles Fourier. And Fourier encouraged the establishment of socialist communities. He called them phalanisteries. Again, I think I'm pronouncing that right. And each of these, their goal would be to be self-sufficient. Similar to what we talked about with Robert Owen and New Lanark, and obviously New Harmony in the United States. But he had it all mapped out almost scientifically that each of these phalanisteries should consist of around 1,600 people who would work together in farming. And then if you were living in the city and there was a phalanistery, you could work in some kind of workshop or trade. And individuals could work the type of jobs that they enjoyed. That was his hope, that they would actually have work that they enjoyed doing. And they could change their jobs frequently so they could avoid some of the boredom of working in the workshops. And what he hoped was that people would get behind this. Philanthropists, business owners would say that, hey, this is a good idea. Look, it worked for Robert Owen and New Lanark. And they would come forward and subsidize these projects. But in the end, nobody really did. A few were founded in other countries, but none, however, even though this guy was French, were founded in France. So the ones that were founded in other countries, they failed. Again, wonder why. We talked about some of these ideas and ideologies, and again, they look good on paper, but the fact of the matter is, people are somewhat greedy. You guys indicated this the other day that if so and so was not really working hard or holding their end of the bargain, just like when we have group projects and things like that, it would cause divisiveness. Now, so as we mentioned, each one of these has a revolutionary idea, and somebody comes along, reads them, and then adapts them, and kind of forms a new policy or a new philosophy and makes it their own. Next guy is Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, and he wrote What is Property in 1840. And again, we see a more idealistic and more radical approach here. Believe that property was profit stolen from the worker. He said the workers were the source of all wealth. And a lot of people consider his What is Property kind of the beginnings of anarchy, as he greatly feared the power of the state, preached against the power of the state. And you can also see some of his ideology in Marx's, when we talk about Marx in the next chapter. Next guy, Louis Blanc, and he wrote The Organization of Work. We need to know him for France and bringing on the next French Revolution. But in The Organization of Work, he proposed competition to eliminate competition. What? How do you do that? Well, let me explain. The first step he felt towards a socialist society of the future would involve political reform, including the establishment of a workers' party, a party that actually represented the masses. As the number of industrial workers went up, the workers' party would win control of the government. The government then would in an evolutionary process, nationalize industries such as the railroads, and they would use the profits from again, collectively controlling the railroads as well as increasing taxes on the upper class to subsidize what Blanc called a social workshop in each major area of industry in France. These workshops would be owned and managed by the workers. In the end, the workers would share all the profits. As profits went up, they would share the profits. So there was his incentive. The workers, he claimed, would be happy and enthusiastic, and therefore they produced better products at a lower cost than privately owned factories. So that this competition would eventually drive privately owned factories into bankruptcy. When those privately owned workshops would close, they would be purchased by the workers and then turned into additional social workshops. In this evolutionary process, or this new social society, the principle of from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs would prevail. Again, very ideological, and he did play a vital role in the June days, which we'll talk about here shortly, in 1848. Now, before we can get into 1848, what we have to do is go back to France politically, and we have to talk about what happened in 1830. Remember, 1830, 1848, huge dates in Europe, in European history, and for the exam. So if you remember, we had left off with Louis XVIII passing away and Charles X assuming the throne. And if you remember, we said that when Charles X came in, he wanted to lessen the influence of the middle class. He wanted to limit the right to vote. He kind of was bringing back a resurgence of conservatism. He wanted to put the clergy back in charge of education. He wanted to use public money to pay nobles for the loss of their lands during the French Revolution, the émigrés. So when he took over, he started to attack the Charter of 1814. He started to limit freedom of the press, freedom of speech. And when the Chambers of Deputies turned against him, he dismissed them. And he basically appointed an ultra-reactionary as his first minister. So again, when he dissolved that legislature, he called for new elections. Ironically, the liberals actually won the new elections. And so then, Charles was like, oh my God, what am I going to do here? So he decided that he would issue something called the July Ordinances. And basically, kind of like the Carlsbad Decrees or the Gag Acts, basically he imposed rigid press censorship. He dissolved the Legislative Assembly again, and he reduced the voting rights in preparation for new elections. Again, Charles made the mistake that people would support these actions because of his naval victories that he had experienced in Algiers. And again, it worked for Napoleon, right? Expand and people get all caught up in that, but it didn't work that way. It was too much. The middle class was used to having some power, so they were ready to pounce and react. And basically what you have here is a new glorious revolution in France. And so from July 27th to July 29th in 1830, the artisans and the tradespeople, kind of like the sans-culottes did in the initial French Revolution, the people of Paris, spurred on by the middle class, put up barricades in Paris and supported a cousin of Charles X. This guy's name was Louis Philippe, and they wanted him to become a constitutional monarch. So some of the revolutionaries actually didn't even think that this was far enough. They favored the establishment of a republic with universal male suffrage. They wanted Lafayette, who was still alive and kicking. He was actually the age of 70, and they wanted him to be the president. But the liberals in the Chambers of Deputies, led by a guy named Talleyrand, remember, Adolphe Thiers, and Francois Gouzot, supported the creation of a constitutional monarchy. And they proclaimed that Louis Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, as king. So, again, the unrest in the streets was too much. Charles X initially thought about just wiping him out, but it was just too much. He actually fled for England for safety. And Louis Philippe and the moderates won because people believed at the time, or wanted to believe, that he was actually a Republican and a liberal at heart. He was actually the son of a revolutionary in 1789 who was guillotined. He also, in the years leading up to 1830, kind of worked on his public image to seem more and more like a member of the bourgeoisie and less like a Bourbon. So, they call this guy the bourgeois king. He dressed like a businessman. He looked like he had some middle class appeal. When he became king, he called himself the king of the French rather than the king of France. Again, think about it. He was trying to change his image. And the red, white, and blue, he brought back the red, white, and blue revolutionary tricolor, the flag, and replaced what had been under the Bourbons, Charles X and Louis XVIII, the white and gold flag of the Bourbons. And even though the Roman Catholicism was the religion of the majority, under Louis Philippe, it was no longer the state religion. As you can see, again, more and more liberal. He brought some of the programs back from the Charter of 1814. If you remember, it was a more moderate. He increased the electorate. However, he did keep property qualifications rather high. He got rid of press censorship. And Louis and his ministers believed that their primary responsibility was to support private property and its owners, promote prosperity, and maintain peace and stability. So, again, going over this, the bourgeois monarch, the citizen king, that's what it was all about. During most of the 1830s, the most prominent figure in the new government was Adolphe Thiers, even though you had Louis Philippe. And economically, France maintained high tariffs to catch up and compete with Great Britain. The major goal was to protect the interests of, as I said, the upper and middle class. Not much attention was paid, however, to the urban poor. The left in this particular era consisted of socialists and Republicans, people that wanted a presidency, wanted a direct democracy, not a constitutional monarchy. However, the conservatives started to split, even though they had control in the 1830s. They started to split in and around 1840s. Political rivalries emerged, as you read. Both of these guys that were leaders were both historians, I just want to say. And you had the Party of Movement. Basically, it was a reformist center-left party led by Adolf Thiers, and he promoted an active foreign policy. He agreed and thought that there should be limited expansion of the franchise, meaning let a few more people get the right to vote. So he was a little bit more liberal than the Party of Resistance. And these guys were a conservative, the center-right, led by Francois Guizot, and he didn't want any further reforms than what happened when, in 1830, when Louis Philippe came to power. Even though he was a liberal, to the ultra-conservatives or royalists, to the voices of the new evolutionary change here, like we just talked about, the socialists, they called for further calls of equality and things to that nature. To them, he was kind of a conservative, so because he wanted to resist further reform. So in the 1840s, he dominated the Chamber of Deputies, if you will. All right, cooperated with Louis Philippe in the middle class, and it worked temporarily. It worked as long as the economy was good. It worked, but stay tuned. As we'll see, Louis Philippe and his government, many people thought that they needed further reform. They're not going to get it. They will get it in 1848. They're not going to get it in the 1830s. So as you can see on this slide, there were trials and tribulations for the citizen king or the bourgeois king. Nonetheless, the impact of the July Revolution had its impact on the rest of Europe. And that old adage, when France sneezes, Europe catches a cold. So we're going to go over some examples here in this next SIGcast, and we're going to talk about the revolts of 1830s. And again, those revolts of 1830s started with what happened in France. That was their model. Thanks for tuning in.